Hi, everyone. Welcome to 2020 FanX Spotlight Panel with bestselling author Terry Brooks. My name is Shawn Speakman. I am the longtime moderator, website guy for Terry. I've known Terry for 20 years. I'm also a writer. I own the Sign Page. Some of you order from the Sign Page. Thank you for your patronage. And also I own Grim Oak. But today we are talking with bestselling author Terry Brooks via FanX. Thank you for joining us. There are some fun things going on today. I guarantee this is the most important thing happening today. Don't let anybody tell you differently, okay? I'm joined by Terry Brooks now on screen. Hi, Terry. How are you doing?
You're stretching it, Shawn. I'll tell you. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy it's Saturday. I'm always eager to talk to you about fantasy, about your work. And I'm excited to have FanX people come in here, ask some questions. So those of you who are watching right now, please feel free to enter in your questions into the comment field. We will be pulling from them a lot during this conversation. Terry and I have done a lot of Zooms over the last couple months. And we've talked a lot about a lot of different things, especially when it comes to Shannara. But we're always eager to hear from you and what kind of questions you have for Terry to answer. So first things first. The Last Druid. It's the chronological end to the Shannara series. This book has been done a long time, Terry. You've actually even written 2 books since then, but due to COVID, things got pushed back and it got published in October. It hit number 15 and number 12 on the New York Times list. So that's great, right? That's wonderful. But can you talk a little bit about what it was like writing that final book, where that last scene came from, how long you knew it, and kind of just give a general kind of, let us know your feelings on finishing the series overall.
Yeah, the last book, The Last Druid, was the 4th book in a 4-book set. So I've been writing it for the last 4 years and kind of knew what the storyline was going to be from the beginning without knowing all the specifics, and characters were pretty well established. I think I felt really tired of Shannara when I started out, and I wanted to wrap it up because I didn't want it to end with me being carried out and the series not being concluded in any kind of way that made sense. And I knew what the ending was supposed to be, so I wanted to be sure I wrote it. And particularly when you mentioned that last paragraph, I've talked about that a lot because I had it in my head right at the start of the series, this will be the last scene. This who will be there. This is what will happen. And this is the emotional reaction that I want the audience to take away at the end of that story. It felt important to me that it end on the right with the right tone and the right way. So I stuck with it and pretty much got what I wanted, I think, out of it.
Great. And so this ends Shannara. I'm a longtime fan. I'm a longtime reader. I've been reading you since I was 13 years old, like 60 years ago. And I've loved your work just like so many other people have loved your work. Have you heard any feedback yet have you seen any feedback online about, that last book and how people are enjoying it? Or have you largely stayed away from any of that and focused on your other work?
Well, sadly, I came to the COVID era as something of a Luddite and a non-social personality. I'm a very social person, but as a social media guy goes, not so much. And now here I am in the thick of being on social media all the goddamn time. And I'm having a lot of trouble struggling with it. I've made it a practice not to pay a whole lot of attention to what people say about what I write. I've always felt that was not a measuring stick that I should let interfere with the work I'm doing. That the work I'm doing is what I want to do. And I don't want to feel like somehow, I don't get a lot of negative feedback ever, even in person, almost never really, from people who come out because they made the effort. They're obviously not coming out to tell me what a dork I am. But I didn't want to know too much about this last book until it had all been out and been read. And, in about a couple of years, I'll start to pay better attention to the comments that came in and how people felt. But for now, I just, it's distracting if you let yourself it's distracting if you become down on yourself. It's distracting if you start to think you're wonderful. either way, it's better to just be in the center and do your work, write your books, which I've been doing, as you said, 2 books, because there's nothing else to do anyway. So I'm working on that. And that's kind of my feeling about that.
How Sword published in 1977. It was an immediate bestseller right out of the gate. There's so many questions I can ask you in your 40 year plus career. But, looking back on that first book, and especially having Lester Del Rey edit you, how much do you think Lester has made it all through these years leading up to this last book? Because Lester passed away in the late 80s, early 90s, right? So how much has Lester made it all through these years?
I'm not sure I get your question. What do you mean? How much Lester has made?
Like, his advice, his wisdom, his how he went about editing you. How the things that you learned from him. How much of that made it into this last book, do you think?
Oh, I think most of it. He's been the most influential person in my life. I've had 4 good editors. Lucky that way. And I have a great one right now. I pay attention to whoever's editing me, obviously. But when you're starting out the way I was, and I didn't know nothing about being a writer, nothing. I'd never had any formal training. I'd never been to any classes. I had never been to any conventions, which I don't think much existed. I didn't know anybody in the business. I didn't even know any other authors I could talk to. So I was really flying by the seat of my pants there for that first book. And Lester was the first person who showed enough interest and had the reputation that I paid close attention. And he was a teacher. He was my mentor, my teacher, my father figure, a whole bunch of things at the same time. And he really shepherded me through those first 3 books tremendously. And I owe most of what works in those books probably to him, because he was careful about seeing that I stuck to my guns about what I was doing, that I paid attention to the rules of writing, and he taught me a lot about what those rules were. And most of them I remember. I can still talk about them, ad nauseum if the opportunity presents itself. So those kinds of things stay with you all your life. I think you never really forget those.
Right. Yeah. Editors are so important to writers, and Lester left his mark on you and on the genre. And his wife Judy Lynn too left such a huge mark on the genre that it can't be denied. He helped you a lot, obviously. You've talked a lot about how Lord of the Rings was an inspiration for you, and I think most people know that. But what other books? We have a comment question that came in from Chelsea. What was your biggest inspiration to become a writer? And that's probably going back a ways. But what kind of books kind of drove you to write, or were you just always a writer, always a storyteller from a young age?
When you talk about going back, we have to go back about 67 years, okay? Because 67 years ago, when I was of such and such an age, I got bit by the writing bug. And it came at a time when all of the role-playing stuff I was doing with neighborhood kids became untenable because they wouldn't listen to me enough. And if you can't control your audience, and you can't do what you want, then you have to move away. So I started getting interested in writing, and I started writing short stories, and there was some of that was school assignments, for crying out loud. And I had a teacher who told me she thought I was pretty good and I should stick with it. So I thought that was good. So I really dedicated myself to finding a way to be a writer and continue to be a writer, and then make a living at it, obviously, ever since then. And I can't even tell you, there's so many different things that influenced me over the years. I was reading science fiction fantasy by the time I was 10. I read everything there was in about 3 years, I think, at those years, because you could in those years. There wasn't that much. I didn't know anything about fantasy. I experimented, I did all these different things, and then I finally got to a point where I was studying English classes, both in high school and college, that were advanced courses, and I was reading all these amazing authors. And I got bit by the William Faulkner bug, and I just absolutely loved his concepts. I could never write like he does, or pretend to write like he does, but the way he talked about the disadvantaged and the predators, and the way he talked about the way we interact as a society with one another, and the haves and the have-nots and so forth, and the lies and secrets that destroy families. This really, really appealed to me to write about it, and so it became part and parcel of the entire Shannara canon. So then it was just, whatever.
Right. Let's see here. We've got some questions coming in here. There's one from Amber Hayford. What inspired you to create the story to happen in a post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear winter setting? I was completely stunned when I realized that's how it all started, and probably just sat in silence for about 10 minutes taking it in, and then reread that page about 15 times. So can you go back, can you talk a little bit about that, I guess, because there's some hints along the way, but you have your own timeline when that actually became a reality for you.
I'm not sure I understand the question. What is she asking?
When did you know that Shannara was post-apocalyptic?
Oh, the post-apocalyptic concept, that winter thing threw me off. For a long time I didn't have to make a decision about it, and I wasn't writing. I was writing in an imaginary space about an imaginary people and events and everything else. Nothing was tied to this world or anything about this world. So I floated along, and when people said, well, where does this take place? I'd say, I don't know. What do you think? And I used that for years. That was the best escape tool I ever developed. And then finally, when I started writing Genesis of Shannara, which was in response to a huge amount of people saying, write about the Great Wars, write about how all this all started. We want to know, the details of all that. So when I did that, I had to ground it somewhere. I couldn't just continue I had to make a choice. Even if I didn't make a choice, I had to make a choice by not making a choice, because either it's an imaginary world and you're never going to know anything more than that, or it's connected to this world at a time in the future. And I was very taken with that idea because of writing Word and Void.
Right. And so I think if I remember your process, your editor at the time, Betsy Mitchell, said, why don't you test this idea out before you connect the two series and see if it works?
Right.
When did you know that it worked?
Well, she said write 100 pages. So I wrote 100 pages. And the further I got into it, the more convinced I became I was on the right track, and that this was going to be a great follow-up. And I never actually explicitly tied the two together, because I don't think they belong together. After all, the Word and Void isn't Shannara. It's Word and Void. It's its own creature. And Shannara might be the sequel to all of that. But it's in the distant future, and it's after a whole series of events that happen. So I didn't want the two to be linked. I wanted them to be kept separate, because you can read Word and Void and never read Shannara, never read Shannara or vice versa. And so I kind of made that my marching orders. Right.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people love Word and Void, and so many people loved how you combined them together. And I can see, as a storyteller myself, I can see how difficult it would have been combining those two together. Let's see here. Let's do another question here, since we have several coming in. Kayla asks, what project has been your favorite and why?
Well, the easiest thing I ever wrote was Phantom Menace. I had carte blanche to do whatever I wanted to from George Lucas. We had a long talk about it, and he went so far as to say, if you don't like something I did, don't put it in the book. Or if you have better ideas about certain things, go ahead and put them in. And he said, if you want to change the dialogue and all that, you can do that. And I said, okay, I'm in. And I had that kind of freedom. And because I was working from a script from the show as a kind of an outline, and knew what the story was supposed to be, and knew enough to say, well, I can add stuff, but I better not get too carried away with trying to rewrite the ending or something. I wrote it in 90 days, and it was over. It was easy, and they didn't change anything. They left it as it was, which was fine with me. I thought it was a fun story to write. But I guess the one that I'm most proud of is Running with Demon. I wrote that in about 6 months straight through, without any breaks, and I just felt like I was on top of that story the whole way, and I knew exactly what it should be. It was my life in small town middle America. It was the way I grew up. It was how we had magic, believed in magic, and I wanted all those things to come through in the story, as well as the idea that you're just that far. Here's my line here. Where's my fist? There we are. About this far away. I'm working in opposites. This far away from. We are all the time from going from being a solid, established society to being one that's in ruins. And it all has to do with the way we behave and the way we interact with each other and what kind of compassion or lack thereof we show for the other person. So that book I felt strongly connected with, and I still do.
Is there, you have a collection of your short fiction coming out in March, and it's called Small Magic.
Mm-hmm.
It has short stories from every series that you've worked within, and the crown jewel in that collection is a Word and Void novella.
Yeah.
How fun was it for you to return to that setting, that Word and Void setting? Because you wrote Running with the Demon in it published in '97, I think.
Yeah.
And so you took a solid 20 years off in between. What was it like writing that novella, Warrior?
It was quite satisfying. I had said for years I would never write anything more in that series, but my editor felt strongly that if I was going to do a book of short stories, that I needed a centerpiece, and she said, pick something. So I thought, all right, there's nothing in here about Word and Void. I'll do that. And I'll do a different kind of Night of the Word story with some different characters. And that, when I was writing it, I thought, yeah, I got something here I'll go with. And it was started out a short story, but it ended up a novella. So obviously I had a lot more interest or something more to say than what I thought I did at the time.
Right. All right. Next question. Let's take a look here. From Kim. Did you initially plan for the Night of the Word series to merge with Shannara in the way it did? We kind of talked a little bit about that, but you can go ahead and answer that.
I don't know. I'm torn about this because the connection is there. But again, the connection was not something I wanted to emphasize because I didn't think it was important. There's no Shannara references or Shannara the word or anything that was true about the Shannara world reflected in that book, except in the first 3 books where we're making the transition over. So I was kind of conscious of it. I was looking at making that an obvious thing for people to look at and consider the possibility of it, but I wasn't trying to beat anybody into accepting that this is necessarily the way it would have been. Yeah,
I can see that. Let's see. Next question. We got good questions here. Marlene, you signed my first Shannara book in Tucson at the book festival. My daughter and I love your work. She cherishes the poster you signed and gave her. Will you continue writer retreats if this age of COVID ends?
Writer retreats? No. I'm done. I finished up with teaching about 10 years ago. I'm not going to do any more teaching. Not going to any more writers' conventions, I don't believe, except maybe as a keynote speaker or something. My time and energy isn't what it used to be. I find I'm sharp as a tack at 5 in the morning, and then I go downhill till about noon. And then I'm brain dead for the rest of the day. So I really have to husband my energy and my efforts and put them into my writing because that's what really matters. People might be interested in what I'm doing and what I have to say, but really, if you come right down to it, people are only interested in your work. What are you writing? What have you got to offer me in the way of another good book? Hurry up and write it. Don't waste your time on all this other nonsense. So I'm pretty focused on that, and I just don't think I'm going to back away from that at this point in my life.
Yeah, I will say that the writing guide and memoir, sometimes the magic works that you wrote, really helped me as a writer. So I would recommend that book specifically to any writers that are out there right now. It really helped me, especially when it came to outlining or not outlining. It really helped my process a lot. So I highly recommend that.
It's funny, Shawn, I still hear from people about that book. I don't even think about that book anymore because it's quite elderly at this point. And some of my things that I was doing at that point that I wrote about, I'm not doing those things anymore because I changed as a writer. One of the things you kind of have to be aware of is that whatever you're doing at any given time, don't count on that being true in another 20, 30 years or whatever. You could change, everything could change because you usually change too, which is a good thing. You shouldn't be static all your life. And the world changes around you, which influences the way that you approach things and the way you think about things. And I just think you have to be fluid.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, especially in these times. My personal word count has gone up dramatically because I can't go anywhere else in the world. I got to be careful with COVID. I'm a two-time cancer survivor. I have to be careful.
We're never letting you out. You're there forever, locked in your house.
It's a silver lining. Nobody has to see my face. That's good. That's good.
Oh, now let's not be encouraging.
Just my wife, and she married me, so she has to put up with it. Let's see. Next question. Let's see here. Neil, this may be different for each book, but what's your process in figuring out and evolving your stories? That's an interesting question. I bet every book is different for you when it comes to that evolution.
Every time. People say, well, what's the hardest thing for you to write? And I say, well, depends on what book you're talking about. You find new things to challenge you every time you sit down to write a new book. It's never the same. And kind of a good thing anyway, because I like the challenges that writing presents. And I like the idea that you're always going to have a struggle with what you're doing. It gives you more satisfaction than when you can meet that challenge and overcome it. So my process is pretty organic. I don't look very far ahead. It's like the people who say, well, did you know how far you were going to go with this series when you wrote the first book? Well, I wish. Wouldn't that have been nice? No, I knew the first book. Usually I know from one book to the next book or one set of books. And that's it. I don't do anything more than that. I wait till I get done because here's what I've learned is that what you write tells you what you need to write next if you're writing in series. Almost inevitably, when I get to the end of a series, or sometimes even to the end of the book, I know what needs to happen next in the evolution of this history of the Shannara world of Four Lands, and that's really been true the whole time, and I rely on that to tell me where things need to go and what I need to do. Then once you get that far, you start to develop the particulars, and each time out, it's different. Ideas don't come in any kind of recognizable order, sadly. Wouldn't that be nice? But they don't. I get most of my ideas, the good ideas, when I'm not looking for them. Usually when I'm at some place where I'm bored and my mind wanders off, and it usually wanders off to some element of the story I'm struggling with, and the next thing you know, I got the answer. But it's not something I can sit down and say, all right, I'm going to solve this problem this morning. I've never been able to do that. If I try to do that, I end up going off to, listen to music or read a book or something. I just can't do it. So I have to rely on intuition and the organic writer's creative process, whatever the heck that is, to develop the things that need to be developed along the way. And again, you never know how that's going to work out. Sometimes it comes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes not at all. And then you have to, go off and do something that will jog your memory in some way or jog your thinking process. But you have to be relaxed about it. You have to understand, I think, and you learn this over the years. I used to be very, very structured in my approach to things. And I was that kind of guy. I was that nerdy little kid who was always prepared because that was my shield, my armor and my shield against the thoughts that, well, this kid's a jerk. What are we wasting time on him for? So I'm sure they still thought I was a jerk, but at least, I was an organized jerk. And that's kind of been my story. And being willing to accept any challenge. I tell people that if there's something that you can't write that's too difficult for you to write, that's a sign that you have to write it. You have to, because you have to be in charge of the asylum. You can't let the writing ever interfere with the fact that you are in control all the time. Now, that's just me, and that's just my controlling side, but still, I think it's pretty important that you be in charge.
That's why you kill so many characters, is because they get unruly, and then you put them in their
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, I said, that's it for you, buddy. You pissed me off one too many times. I have a rule about character killing also. I don't like stories where everybody dies, and at the end of the book I'm saying, well, what the heck? This is nihilistic, and it didn't teach me a thing. I never kill off characters without a very good reason. Never just for impact. Never just because, well, this would be kind of cool. I think I'll kill off my main character. No, I do it because it serves the book. It serves the story. It serves the way in which the story is going to be told and how the emotional impact it's going to have on the readers at the end. So everything has to have that consideration get extended to it.
You talk about challenging yourself as a writer, and how important that is for your process, because it almost like every time it rejuvenates you to continue on. You wrote in third person for a lot of years, and then especially fantasy, and then you decided to write Street Freaks in a very different way. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of that book, and the choices of point of view and tense and everything that you made in that book? Because that's a very different book, and then that book is even very different from the book you just finished.
Yeah, I actually wrote Street Freaks about 4 times, each time with a different tense, each time in a different person. I experimented with it all over the place, really, just trying to get it right, because I couldn't really decide if this should be told in the first person, which is very limiting in many ways, or if it was going to be a third person story, which is I've been doing forever. So I ended up going with the first person, but I felt like I think I did anyway. I can't remember now what I ended up doing with that book. It's got me confused. But the point was, I was writing something outside my comfort zone. I was writing a book that was essentially a science fiction story for somebody who doesn't know any science. And I was writing what I would call a futuristic adventure story. So there were science issues in it, and there were some things that it was not a fantasy in the sense of anything I'd been doing. So I did have to experiment with that quite a bit. And what I found was, even after I had reworked it 2 or 3 times, when I'd go back through and my person would slip back into third person. I do it all the time. And my editor kept pointing it out too. She said, you're doing this over and over again. And it's because I think it's become such a habit after however many books, 30 some, 35 books, something like that, that I couldn't stop myself. And it is hard. And then, of course, there's the new book. And the new book was, I don't know. I never thought about writing it any other way than in first person. I felt like the impact of the story was on the main character, and that impact is stronger when you write it in the first person. And I think a lot about YA, young adult books, which write frequently in the first person, probably more so than any other than adult books. I think it's very significantly appropriate for young people to be writing in the first person. I think they understand it better and they're comfortable with it. I didn't struggle with it here because I had a character who was in her late teens, but who's in prison. So the question was, if she is there, how will I convey the impact that is needed for a character who the entire book depends upon? What happens to her is what is going to determine whether or not this book is successful. And because it was a, headlong pell-mell flight all the way through, I wanted her to be the focus of the story, and I wanted her thoughts to be central to everything that was happening. So that's how I ended up doing that.
Did you, when you were writing in first person, because you write in multiple points of view in almost every single book.
Yeah, that's true.
Did you find yourself writing about her? Did you find yourself wanting, I need to write about this other character because I'm interested in that character too? Or were you just really focused on her the entire time?
I didn't have any trouble with this one. No, I was focused on her the entire time. And every time I needed to convey what was going on, I found a way to do it that didn't require me to compromise in any way. It did mean that all the scenes pretty much had to happen either off stage where nobody views it, or in the presence of our protagonist. And that required a little bit of thought from time to time as to how to structure the story. But at the end of the day, it was doable, and I felt like I got done exactly what I wanted to. And as you know, Judine, my agent, and my editor all said, this is a really great book, and you're going to be very happy with this. It's a worthy successor to your Shannara stories, which is what I was looking for, something that people could go to and find the kind of story they've come to expect in the Shannara series. So I feel like I got that job done now, and I'll go on from here. And I don't know how many more of these I'll write. I will at least one, but at least I know I can do it if I want to.
And that book's coming out in June, I believe. So everybody out there is watching this, get ready for this book. I've read the first 4 chapters. I'm reading it right now. And there is magic in every single chapter in this book, like just the language that's used, the story that's being told. I mean, magic just in the literary sense. It's wonderful. I can't wait to get back and reading it today. I'm super excited for it, and for all your readers too, because I think they're going to love it. I think your editor and your agent are correct, and Judine too. But we know Judine's always right. So
Judine's always right. And this house,
listen to her more. Let's see. Next question. Hold on. Sorry.
Add something quickly. It's the funny thing about this book is that I wrote it in 4 months, and I wrote it straight through, and I didn't slow down. It was a headlong rush to get to the end of this story, and I really felt like I was on top of it the whole time. And when that happens, that almost never happens, but when it does happen, it means you're really onto something. And I think that is going to turn out to be true.
Yeah, I think you felt the same way when you finished Running with a Demon, or when you were writing Running with a Demon. You had that same feeling, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, next question. Let's see here. Jill, when you're writing, is every character and their background always so clear?
When you're writing, is every character and their background always so clear? To who?
Yeah.
The character had a more challenging time fleshing out. Well, yeah, of course. But of course. But the trouble is, it's never the same character or type of character, and I never know which one it's going to be until I'm in the midst of it, and then I discover to my horror the one that's going to present the big problems, which you just don't, you're not looking for it, and then there it is, staring you right in the face. And the problems are sometimes they're of development of the character in the proper way, sometimes they're voice. Sometimes they're about what's the problem with this character that everybody's going to want to notice. What is it that makes this character flawed? Because as we know, all people are flawed in some way or another. And characters in a book need to express that same evidence, that same problem in order for people to believe in it. So, I think anytime you're writing a book, it's not like once you've written one or 2 or 3 or 4, you've solved all your problems. Doesn't work that way, because each time out the creative process changes, and each time out the way the story turns out changes, and you have to work your way through what the problems are going to be, because you're not going to see them coming.
Right. Yeah. The book I'm writing right now, I'm writing the sequel to the Dark Thorn, which is an urban fantasy kind of word void Jim Butcher series, and I really in this second book I have a character that starts off early in the book. And she's not necessarily that important at the very beginning, but by the end, she's really important. And I feel drawn to writing more chapters from her point of view. Do you think that you can be imbalanced when it comes to point of views throughout the book, and having too much of one point of view at the end and not having enough of that same point of view up front? Is there a balance that needs to be struck, or is it just the way that the story needs to be told?
I think you're in service to the story all the time, and the writing, the organic process of creativity and writing is what determines your decisions, and your decisions are final. And nobody else is going to write this thing for you. You have to write it. I don't agonize a lot over giving people equal time, or even giving them life beyond page 25. I give thought to what the story demands, and who's going to bring the best perspective, and what's going to need to be shown and told at any given point. And sometimes I will usually write the story straight through, but sometimes I'll go back and move chapters around. Sometimes at the suggestion of my editor, sometimes at the suggestion of Judine, sometimes me. But the process is one of, a big puzzle that you're putting together. And sometimes you get yourself in a place where you can't find the right piece. And so you have to work around to getting a new piece to fit in where you think it needs to go.
Right. All right, let's see. We're over halfway through today's FanX 2020 Spotlight panel with Terry Brooks. Let's do another question, see if we can get through all the questions today. Suzanne, what was the hardest character for you to kill off? Did you have regrets about doing it?
Well, I kind of regretted losing Walker Bow, but I think that I had made a decision rather early on in these stories that druids were the high-risk characters in these books, and there wasn't a history of druids living a long time beyond the time that they enjoyed the druid sleep and were in service to the world. So I didn't want to let him go because he was a great character. He's complex. He struggled a lot, as we all do, about life and about what was expected of him. And I think people identified with him pretty strongly. So that one for sure. There's some others I can think about that I felt regret. I didn't like to see them go, and I felt bad for them. But again, you always have to think about what is necessary in order to generate the emotions and the impact that you want from your audience.
Yeah, I hear you there. Like Grianne for me is, I love Walker, I love Al-Anon, but Grianne for me is I think one of your best creations. And I finished 2 different books that she's been in, and you've pulled that emotional heartstring on me both times.
Yeah, she's kind of a tragic figure.
Yeah, and you spent a lot of time with her too. I mean, that was conscious on your part. Can you talk a little bit about why? Why did you spend so much time with Grianne?
That was because I was caught up in the question of transgression and redemption, generated by televangelists who disappointed me in major ways, along with a whole bunch of other people, by committing violations of the 10 Commandments at least, and then coming back and saying that they'd been forgiven by their higher power. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, that's not how the world works, actually. We aren't so quick to forgive, and we don't care what anybody else thinks, because if we dislike somebody enough, or we dislike what they've done enough, we tend to hold it against them. And sometimes getting a forgiveness is hard won, and maybe you'll never actually get it from everybody anyway. That's kind of unrealistic. So she was the character that was going to explore those depths, and she went from being an assassin to being the head of the Druid Order, to being betrayed by the people within her order, to being despised as a bringer of all kinds of trouble.
Yeah.
And then she was dragged away into the forbidding, and she couldn't get out of there. And then she did get out of there, and then she got dragged back in again. She around all over the place. And all the time she's saying to herself, she said, what more do I have to put up with in order to get through this? And is there never going to be any peace for me? And of course, we find out in the last book, actually, how she finally finds a resolution to her problem. But I was not sure I think I've got her in 9 books or something out of that series, probably more than any other character. And just because exploring that question was not an easy exploration for me. I really felt like she needed to come back several times in order to answer the question about what should happen to her.
Right. All right, next question. I believe this one's from Edgar. Why are you ending Shannara? ? Ooh, he's Thanos. Beware, it's Thanos, Terry.
I was going to say, I don't know if I should answer that one. Well, as I've said, I really didn't want some other writer ending it for me. I wanted my ending to be the ending. And as I say, contrary to my own very firm belief. It turns out maybe I won't live forever, which is very troubling to me, and I'm still dealing with that. But assuming I don't, maybe I ought to get this thing written before, I get to a point where I can't write it for one reason or another, or, I'm not here to write it. So I just sat down and said, I'm going to plan it, and when I get ready to do it, I'm going to write it. I'm going to write it now. I basically said, I'm going to write it before I'm 80. 80 as I can't know anything about what happens after 80.
Yeah.
So I just seemed that now's a good time to get it written and put it to bed. And then if I want to write more later, I can do it. But that was kind of the thrust.
There are numerous places, especially in prehistory, that you could return to if the impetus to return to Shannara happens. So that's
a big comforting. A lot of characters.
Yeah, that's comforting to the readers for sure. Let's see. Next question. Heather, how do you re-energize, refresh yourself and your creativity between works? That's an excellent question. I like that, Heather.
For one thing, I don't work all the time, which is very helpful. I tend to work in spurts. I don't put limits on myself as to how much I'm supposed to accomplish each time I sit down to the computer, because sometimes I don't accomplish anything. Sometimes I write a lot. You just kind of have to wait and see. The process either works for you that day or it doesn't work so much. And I take days off, unlike Stephen King and a few others. I believe in taking days off and having downtime with your family, or maybe just with your wife, and doing things outside of your writing area and your writing itself. That's it. I read a lot. Reading is very relaxing for me, and it's also educational in many instances. I used to travel in the days when we could travel, either with COVID not being present or other countries welcoming us with open arms. And I hope to see those days return, because I will travel again if I possibly can. And then, the things you do in daily life that everybody does that you have to do. Somebody's got to shop for groceries. Somebody's got to go put gas in the car. Somebody's got to do this, that, and the other thing. So all that is relaxing,
Yeah. All right. Next question. We have about 15 minutes left here, so we can answer these last couple questions. Neil, which series of your books would you recommend reading first?
The one you like the appeal of the most. I think that what you have to do with the Shannara series in particular is to look at the series and see what it looks like. If it looks like something that would interest you, then read it. Obviously, they're all wonderful, so it's very difficult for me to say, oh, you should start here or there. But it doesn't really matter as long as you start at the beginning of a set. Don't start with the second book in a set, because then you wonder what the heck's going on. As between Shannara and Word and Void and Magic Kingdom, they're very different. I talk about Magic Kingdom as more funny and comedic in one regard. It's lighter in tone. Shannara's classic fantasy, Tolkien-esque fantasy. And Word and Void is kind of a dark suburban fantasy, I guess you'd call it, something along those lines. So they are very different, but they have a lot of hallmarks of the same, and you pretty much can tell it's the same writer doing all of them.
Yeah.
And Street Freaks, which is another thing, it has nothing to do with any of the others. So I don't know.
I'm really pleased with Street Freaks, especially this year, because it seems like a lot of people are, because of the delay, the COVID delay in Last Druid publishing. I think people were really wanting a Terry Brooks book, and they turned to Street Freaks, which is, sci-fi thriller adventure kind of story. And I see people are posting reviews all the time how much they love it, which makes me happy. So
it's funny, isn't it? When we published that, you and I, the response to it was sort of tepid. It got some good marks and it sold okay, but it didn't do nearly as well as we thought it would, because the truth is that that's been true for everything since Shannara. That every time I start something new, people are reticent. Well, we'll just wait for the next Shannara book. We'll just, we'll wait for that. Well, you can't do that anymore, because there's no more Shannara books coming for the foreseeable future. So read something else. And that's kind of what's happened. And now we're hearing people who say, well, when are you going to write the next one? And indeed, when am I going to write the next one?
Yeah, you're busy. You're busy. The good thing, though, is that you're so busy and you're writing so many books right now because you're locked in your office.
I
And all
am.
your readers are going to be getting a lot of books coming out in the next 2 or 3 years.
I'm hopeful. I could freeze up at any moment, but right now I'm thinking, I'll write the next book in the new series. Probably have it done by spring or summer of next year, for publication in 2022. So I'm still ahead of the game here, but I'm finding it's easier to focus. I don't have the distractions, that you would have otherwise. If you can't go anywhere and you can't do anything, there you are. You do what you can do within your confines. So in my palatial prison here, I can write and look out at the ocean and feel like I'm, kind of going to a new place anyway all the time. And I don't need I miss the social interaction, but that's probably I'm making up for it here on our Zoom websites and that sort of thing, I guess.
Yeah, you mentioned in one of our previous talks that you were considering maybe not touring again, or at least drastically cutting it back.
Mm-hmm.
If COVID, if science can figure out how to get rid of COVID, do you think you'll go out there and tour again, or do you think that's mostly over now?
I think it's over, but Judine says, no, you'll go. Okay. I think it's because, connecting with fans on a personal level, not virtual, but right personal, is a tremendous energy boost that you get. And I can't underestimate or overstate that this connection is what fuels me to go back and write and to do a good job of it, or at least the best job I can do. So that part I'll miss. And I miss hearing the fans talk about what they liked about a book or what interests them or what they're reading. I miss all that. And I'm not getting it to the extent I used to. So that's kind of unfortunate. But by the same token, I'm not, I'm not 25 or 35 or 45 or so on. You get the point. And it's harder for me to get on the road for a couple, 2-3 weeks and go out there and schlep around the country and eat at fast food places and, drive or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not as, it sounds wonderful, but it's hard work and it wears you down pretty fast.
Right.
For me now.
All right, let's see. Is there a next question here? Let's see. Edgar again. What do you think of time travel stories? Would you write one of those?
Well, I don't know that I would. We have Ben Holiday, who travels out of this world into the world of Landover. It's not exactly time travel, but it is, going from one world to another. And in the new book, we've got going from one world into an adjacent world, from the world of the humans to the world of the Fae. I don't have an idea. If I get an idea, I'll write anything. It doesn't matter to me. I need an idea. I need to be enthused about it. I need to be something I can be enthused about. It needs to have some questions that I want to answer by writing about it. And all that has to come together. And I go through a lot of ideas and a lot of concepts to get to a point where I've got something that I really want to follow through with. And so I think that that'll determine more than anything else what I write. Right.
Yeah. Just from a fan point of view, I think what Edgar asked there, like I look at Word and Void almost as a time travel, but just not in a way that normal people think of a person traveling through time and going somewhere else. The Word and Void series, the knights have a dream and they dream of a future that if they fail in the present, that future is coming to be. And that's almost like altering the possible future.
Right. Exactly.
So if you ever read Running with the Demon, I highly recommend it. It's definitely one of my favorite of your books. Let's see. Nina Callahan asked a question that you already answered a little while ago. Why do you not include the Word and Void series with the Shannara series? You kind of answered that.
I did.
A little earlier. They're kind of not connected in any serious, concrete way.
I like the idea of my keeping my books separate. I think we've got enough Shannara books. We don't need 3 more. And Word and Void is sort of special to me because it's that circular tale that starts with book 1 and ends with book 3. It's very, very cyclical in that regard, and also in the regard of a beginning and a resolution of the problem at the end of that beginning. And I feel like I've done most of what I could do with that story. If I were ever to go back into it now, I would do what I did with the novella, is write with different characters and different situation, but with the backdrop of the story and the magic, the schematic of the magic, and so on, as the building blocks for creating it.
All right, so we're gonna wrap things up here a little bit. I'm gonna give you one opportunity here. So somebody did say one thing here. Jen Stowers said, "I was today years old when I found out I've been pronouncing Shannara wrong this whole time."
Well, don't worry, you're forgiven. Everybody says that word a different way, it seems like, and it was never my intention that it should be any other way. I never did the glossaries or pronunciation guides or anything like that, because it is my firm belief that the readers, if they want to really possess the book, if they want it to be their book, they should be able to pronounce the characters and the places and all that any way they want to. And they shouldn't be constrained in any way, because what's the difference how I see it? I say it one way, somebody else says it differently, so what? And with the Shannara Chronicles, the writers started right out and they said, well, about when we get into Shannara further, and I said, wait a minute, you don't say it that way, you say Shannara. Because I thought, well, it's a TV show, they should say it the right way, which is the way I say it. Well, they said, no, Terry, that's not true. Actually, we're going with your fans. This is how most of them say it, Shannara, excuse me, whatever, and Shannara. And so your opinion is valued, but in this case, we're not going to pay attention to it. And I thought, something's wrong here with the hierarchy, but okay, I've said this all along. I can't very well go back now and say, well, I've changed my mind, and so I want it different. That's the way it is.
All right. So we're going to wrap this up now. FanX was gracious enough to hold a contest for advanced reader copies of The Last Druid. And I'm going to announce the winners of that art contest right now. And there it is up on the screen. So Carly Webster, Chris Oakleberry, Marlene Schmaus, Amber Hayford, and Edgar Navas. Congrats. There you go. So your advanced reader copies will be on their way in the mail, I'm sure, sometime very, very soon. And I know I can speak on Terry's behalf with this. I hope you enjoy it, because it's great.
Yeah.
And let's see. You know what? I think we're kind of at the end here. You get the closing lines here, Terry. So I'll just hand this over to you. And thank you, FanX. Thank you for everybody that attended today. Thank you for all of that. And I'll leave it over to Terry here.
I'll add my thanks to yours, Shawn. I've been going to various Comic-Cons and writers' conferences for many, many years now. And I've always been treated very well and always enjoyed them, enjoyed the people. I tell everybody that this is the one place you can go that is actually the big tent. Forget all those political claims. The big tent is in science fiction fantasy, where all people, all kinds of ideas, everything is embraced and appreciated. And there's no attempt to try to govern what people do and say and think. And I think that's the way that our lives should be in any case. And if a writer like me can get this kind of a response, then I'd say that it speaks well for the construct and for the chances of the other writers as well. And I like that quite a bit. I hope you'll stick with me after Shannara. For those of you who are expecting something good, I'm going to try and give it to you. And I'll be writing right up to, as I say, they pry my cold, dead fingers from the keyboard. I can't imagine doing anything else at this point, and being retired does not appeal to me at all. So I'll be hanging in there. And I hope that we're all going to see each other again in the not too distant future in real time and not necessarily in virtual time. I'm sure that things are going to straighten out and be better. Maybe not for a while, maybe even a year away from now, but it's going to come back around. And I ask everyone to look after themselves and be safe in the meantime. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Terry. You're great as usual, and keep safe out there, everybody. Stay sane, deep breaths. We'll get through all this together. Read a good book. That's the key.
Read a good book. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.